Hello, this is Tael, and welcome to Tael Talk. Sorry it's been a little bit quiet, things have been a little hectic, but there should be more content on the way now. I'm working part-time again as opposed to 6 days a week, so yes, there should be more content on the way. Anyway, no one cares about any of that. I'm here today to talk to you about a little game that I played a couple of weeks back called Griffins Story. This was a game I picked up for about $2, which is probably the cheapest I've ever seen any game at an EB. $2, I just picked it up because I was aware of the film, and I knew the film had bombed really hard, but I didn't know there was a game based on it. I couldn't believe there was a game based on it, actually, because the movie did bomb so hard. And for $2, and it had like Arial font like on the front, so it obviously had a lot of care put into it. I had to grab it, so I did. And I'm kind of glad I did, but at the same time, I'm kind of not. So Jumper was created by a developer called Red Tribe, and it was released in 2008, and it was released on the Xbox 360, the Wii, and the PlayStation 2, of all things. The game had clearly a really small budget and a very short development cycle. It shows straight away because when you start up the game you get a cutscene, which is done in a very comic book style, which, you know, that's fair enough, and that's one way of working around cost constraints. But there was no actual thought put into explaining just who you are or what's going on, and it kind of made everything really, really confusing. I'm someone who has never seen the movie or read the books, and I had no idea what was going on. Now, I know with licensed games you would expect the people who are playing it to at least have a bit of an idea of what they're getting into, but I think a good licensed game will either tell a complete story so you know what's going on if you haven't seen it, or just don't approach things like this. Just there's no excuse for it. Now, the game's combat system is interesting in theory, but it was boring and repetitive in practice. Okay, so each enemy has these 4 little coloured lines on either side of them at the top, bottom, left or right. And you hit the button on the controller that best represents the side you want to hit the enemy from, so either A or B or X, Y, depending on if you want to hit them from the top or the bottom or the left or the right, respectively. It depends on where they're blocking, because if you hit them when you're blocking, you get countered immediately. And this has felt incredibly clunky and dull on the Xbox 360, rest assured, and it didn't work too well. But the fact that there was a Wii version of this that was using Waggle, that terrifies me. I can't even imagine how bad that would be. So every time you hit either one of these buttons to do your combat, it actually teleports your character to that side of the character to act out a move. And what this means is you barely ever have any sense of relation in 3D space as to where your character is, because he just flashes around from place to place, and you never really have any idea whereabouts your character actually are. And this becomes especially problematic when there's rooms full of enemies, as they'll gang up on you before you even realise where you are on the actual screen because of the way the teleportation works. And it also means that you actually spend most of your time looking at the enemies waiting for a side to attack from to light up, as opposed to looking at your own character, which is a really strange problem for a game to have. I don't know if I've ever played a game that had that issue before. It was very, very confusing. To make matters worse, there are also enemies with projectiles. They either have like these guns that shoot ropes or just regular guns, and you can't actually dodge any of these things when you're in the middle of a combat chain. You basically just have to take a hit. And the actual chances of you seeing these projectiles in the first place are so slim because of the erratic nature of the visuals that it led to a lot of cheap deaths and was very, very frustrating. And it's due to these design choices. Can I call them choices? I don't know why. I guess they must be choices. They chose to make the game like this. The game feels incredibly cheap, and there are some really, really cheap deaths that I got through this game. There are some times where I admit, yes, that was me not playing well enough, that's why I'm dead. But most of the time, it just felt like cheap deaths because the game just wasn't working properly. Okay, so to go with the extremely subpar gameplay, there's also the visuals. If you've been watching this, you probably thought this was a PlayStation 2 game, possibly running through an emulator in HD, and that's honestly what it felt like. It looks atrocious, to say the least. There are PlayStation 2 games that look better than this Xbox 360 game, which is kind of weird. Although, and this is rather hilarious, and it's actually one of the few things about the game that I did appreciate, is it actually runs in 1080p, which is something that a lot of Xbox One games and PlayStation 4 games are still struggling with. So there's that, but just running in HD doesn't mean much when you can't see what the fuck is going on, when everything looks so terrible. So speaking of not being able to see what the fuck's going on, along with the teleporting mechanic, which obviously is visually confusing as all hell, the environments in some areas are so dark and muddy that you can't see where you are or who you're fighting. The dockyard level is probably the worst example of this. So in this stage, alright, this is some game design for you folks. Don't ever do this. Your character is dressed in black, and the characters you're fighting are also dressed in black, and you're fighting in the dark. Yeah, that's something that someone approved and thought was a good idea. It's incredibly, as you can probably tell in the video, it's incredibly confusing to watch, and actually playing the game, I was literally seething because I was so frustrated with that, not knowing what the fuck what was happening, what was going on. And the most frustrating thing about this, I think, is the fact that it would have been really simple to fix. All you had to do is either like put the enemies in brighter clothing, or put like a little icon above your character, like a little bright green icon, so you could always keep track of where you were on the screen. Super simple solution to this problem. Shouldn't have been a big deal, but there it is. Speaking of environments, the game also has a really bad habit of recycling them. You will see all of the levels in this game at least twice, in some context, some of them more than that. Which is it just shouldn't be a thing, but there it is. There's also the bosses in the game. Now, boss fights are a funny thing. I brought this up in my Quantum of Solace video as well. Bosses can be quite hard to handle in games based off movies sometimes. I just realized that I've done 3 licensed games back to back. I'll have to change that for the next one. How do you handle bosses in a game where everyone's sort of supposed to be just like people with like some teleporting ability? What do you do? Well, what I would recommend not doing is making it so that the fight takes forever. And you're just wailing out this exact same combo over and over again for minutes at end. What am I talking about, you ask? Well, here's a little video sped up to give you a bit of an idea. Yep, that was every bit as boring and repetitive and painful as it looked. But once again, someone approved this idea and they left it in the game for some reason. Speaking of pointless things left in the game, it also has some really weird, pointless cutscenes. So you'll walk into a room and you'll beat everyone up, and then a ton more enemies will pour in, and instead of fighting them, your character will teleport to another room. And this will usually end up being completely full of enemies as well. So basically he's running away from something into the exact same thing, which kind of makes it all completely redundant. And once again, I'm not entirely sure whose idea this was or why they thought it was a good idea, but no, weird. Stop it, cut it out. This is terrible. Thankfully, the whole experience was over in a mere 3 hours. Which makes you wonder how this game sat on store shelves when it came out, because this was a full-price retail game, which is absolutely insane. This came out at the same time as Devil May Cry 4, believe it or not, and those 2 games are sitting side by side on store shelves. Blows my mind. But in conclusion, was this game, this Jumper Griffins Story, worth the $2 I paid for it? Yes and no. Jumper is a terrible game in every sense of the term, don't get me wrong. And while I did get a kick out of its incompetence, the average gamer is not going to get much out of this game, if anything at all. However, this is a little asterisk here, I would definitely recommend this game to anyone who is studying game design, as it's a really good teaching tool on how not to make a game. There's a lot of really interesting game design decisions in here that just shouldn't ever happen, but there they are. And I think anyone studying game design might find that interesting. Outside of that though, there is absolutely no reason for anyone to pick this game up ever again. This has been Tael Talk. If you've had any experiences with this game, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe, and thank you for sticking around. Hopefully I'll have another video up for another game very soon, but until then, peace out and have a good one.